Your time. Before I start, if I could just mention that under the racial vilification policy, Rule 35, the peak rule, I can't give some of the specifics around the incident, but I'm happy to take all questions.
It's not standing where you are.
Tex has had a big 2 weeks. It's been since it's been investigated. He's had a long 2 weeks. We had the conciliation yesterday, which came to an outcome which was good. He's fronted the club today. He spoke to our Indigenous players. He's spoken to our playing group. He's an emotional wreck at the moment, but it's not just about him. There's a number of people that have been affected here. But he made a comment this morning, and he'll be in a position to speak, I think, in the not too distant future.
Can you see how it might not be a great look that he's not here fronting him?
I understand that point, but like I said, he's had a challenging period and he's fronted the club, he's owned the mistake, he's spoken to both our Indigenous players as well as our broader playing group and our football department, and we expect him to front the media in the not too distant future. But he is also, with the conciliation process, there are only some things that he can say. He owned the mistake. He owned it first and foremost. He owned this mistake. It was a serious error of judgment for him. He was disappointed in himself. He couldn't believe really that it came out of his mouth, but he needed to own it because it did. He's apologetic and he's just genuinely embarrassed. They got together as a group, so we did that group earlier this morning. We met them as leaders of the club beforehand to see if they were comfortable to speak to him, which they were. They listened to him. But these things take time. We're a people-first culture here at the club, and we've got to look after all our people, and they're going to take time to get through this. So it's been upsetting for a number of people.
How did you actually find out about the whole thing from the start?
I found out not too long thereafter the Sample game, and when we found out as a club, there was an internal person that reported it to us. We referred it to the AFL straight away, so it was self-reporting, and we went through the process, the racial vilification investigation process. And yeah, that took over 2 weeks, but we felt like it was the right thing to do, to self-report, and we think it took some real courage from someone internal, and it sort of sets our culture a little bit, that an internal person was able to hold up someone who's been at the club for 14 years with such an illustrious career, to hold him to account for what he said.
Given the culture you're trying to set as CEO, what was your initial reaction to his comment?
Look, it's just pure disappointment. There's a little bit of anger. I genuinely couldn't believe that he would say something like that, having got to know Taylor over the last period of time, and I think for him himself, I'm not sure he can reconcile that came out of his mouth. So there's real disappointment because we're trying to set a great culture at this club, and what he said, it just doesn't fit our values.
We don't stand for that.
So we're very disappointed.
You said there that Taylor was surprised the words came out of his mouth himself. Did he at all apologise before this investigation was undertaken, around the time he made the comment?
Did he apologise?
Yeah, did he say at the time, I should have said that, sorry guys? Was there anything about that time?
Once we reported to the AFL, it went specifically through the investigation process. So what we were told was that it needed to be an independent process. So as a footy club, we actually stepped aside. So the AFL and the Integrity Unit took that on. So I can't give the specifics of that, but I can tell you that he is genuinely remorseful.
Would you say Tex Walker has been given more education in this space than the average Australian?
Yes, I've been in the industry for longer than Taylor, and he's been part of Indigenous education programs for a long period of time. So he should have known better. He's a role model for our club and the industry, and he should have known better.
What do you think his Indigenous teammates, his former teammates, and really every First Nations person in this country will think when someone who's been given that level of education says that comment in private? Or
I probably don't want to speak on their behalf, but if it's anything like I've seen internally and some of the people that I've spoken to over the last 2 days, there's a range of emotions which range from anger to disappointment. But what we can take from this, there's something that hasn't happened that has been great for this club, but we can learn from this, and we are saying that we don't stand for racial vilification. This club doesn't, this industry doesn't, and nor should the community. So we can learn from this error of judgment.
You said you can't speak for other people, but you haven't allowed other people within the club to speak on this. Why can't players, particularly some of the Indigenous players, speak about this?
Well, like I said right at the start, it has been a process that we've undertaken, and we've gone through the racial vilification policy. So we were unable to allow our players to make any comment until the conciliation was finished. Now it has. They are free to make some comment, but again, we can't go into the details of the process.
On camera this afternoon, in any way through the club's media about this issue, apologising?
We will work with him. He's made a public comment today. We'll work with him over the next little while to see if he's available for comment.
Were the players themselves angry and disappointed?
Yes. I think from the leadership to the youngest player, they were disappointed across the board. And we talk about our football leaders, we talk about our administrators. It's, you know, that we don't stand for that.
What's his future going forward?
His future, we haven't even got to speaking about his future. At the moment, we are people first. There's a lot of people that have been affected in different ways. So we're just trying to look after our people, make sure they're supported as well as possible, and get through the next few days.
Can you see how it looks like?
Did they accept that apology?
What he did is he spoke to the broader group, made reference to his apology, his remorse, and I think each individual will now take it up with him individually. It wasn't a group acceptance. It was put his cards on the table, say what he's done, talk about his remorse and how he wants to get better, and then we move forward.
How do you feel about the sanction given 6 weeks suspension?
We think it's appropriate. We endorse the sanctions. We look, it is a large sanction, suspension, as well as financial, but we think it's befitting of the crime and shows that we as a club and the industry don't stand for that.
A couple of years ago, there was a ban who was banned for 2 years for racist comments. Is there a disparity there in the two sanctions?
Look, I don't know the detail of that specific event, but we think there's not many markers in the AFL over the last 20 years, but we feel that it is sufficient and enough, being 6 weeks when we compare it to what's happened in the past. And, you know, we've progressed a lot in the last 20 years, and we think it's befitting of the crime.
How is it tenable for a player to walk into a playing group of which there are Indigenous players next year when Texas comes back, or even at training for the rest of the season, and a fracture, there be some level of discomfort between an Indigenous player and a former skipper?
Well, we've just got to work with our group. Like I said, we've got to support our people. We've asked for some independent help. We're not experts in this space. So we've asked for Tanya Hosh from the AFL as well as Paulie Vandenberg to support us, support our Indigenous players as well as our broader playing group so that we can get through the next little period of time, because there's going to be some challenge. We understand that, and now we have to lead as best we can. I'd like to think so.
Can you see how it looks like hypocrisy that Texas fronted anti-racism campaigns in the past, or even lip service that he's done that and now comes out and does this?
I totally understand that, but like I said before, as I said, I couldn't believe that something like that would come out of his mouth, and I genuinely feel he can't reconcile that either.
You said that you feel like sanctions are appropriate. 18 years ago, I think Darren got 5-game suspension for something, and somebody won a game in that. Jaden Stevenson, 10 matches for gambling. In terms of the comparisons there, gambling and racial part, do you think that stacks up?
Oh, look, they are in different buckets, and I understand what you're saying, but we've spoken to the AFL, we've spoken to the AFLPA, we've had major stakeholders, Taylor's management group, and we believe the sanction is fair and befitting the crime.
Is that the last